To me, another problem is the double standard for police versus black people. So, on one end, you have a woman who just murdered someone for, as of now, it seems like relative strangers. She was let out after an hour on $300,000 bond. However, there was a protest in the name of Botham John, and you had nine protesters that were arrested. From what I know, basically towards the end of the protest, thrown in jail for 40 hours. From speaking with some of them, were taunted by police. They were in some cases, kind of more like cages than actual cells. So you have a white police officer who just murdered someone. Either there is more to the situation that we don't know, or not all is well in her mind. Right. But she's out free, as far as I know, not under house arrest or anything like that. Yeah. But these men and women, there were nine of them, a mix, mostly African American, were basically in jail for 40 hours. It seems to me, and when you loop in the fact that a separate case, O'Shea Terry, which we've been covering, they won't release the officer's name because he's received death threats. Kind of doesn't make sense. Nobody knows who he is, so how could there be threats? My point to you is, what are your thoughts on it? It seems like there's different rules as far as white police officers than there are for black men.
Yeah, well, clearly there's a double standard, because the other thing that happened, and this is something that needs to change, is she was not questioned, or she was released and was not questioned about this for up to 72 hours. See, she wasn't arrested until 3 days later. She was able to go home free for 3 days. Then she was arrested, and then, as you pointed out, within 1 hour released. She wasn't arrested here in Dallas, where the crime was committed. She actually turned herself in Kaufman County. We don't know why that's the case. So yes, that's clearly because let's say the situation was different, that Botham entered her apartment by mistake and shot and killed her. He would have been arrested immediately. His bond would have probably been $2 million or more. You see, so there's clearly a double standard, and as I mentioned earlier, there are other cases. O'Shea Terry's case over in Arlington, still questions that are outstanding, and all of these areas of social injustice. These are things that we have to do something about. We cannot continue in this country as we have been in the past. And so we've got to make sure that we get justice for both of them, and also for others who have been mistreated, and then also change the image of the black male in the minds of our police departments.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is it seems like more or less the national media really will start to cover these things if you start to see, mass protests, like we saw in Ferguson. Yes. In some ways, if there's a chance of like a shootout at the OK Corral between police and protesters. If not, they're pretty much set on, Trump and all that 24/7. So it seems like these situations kind of become normalized because they're not getting that mass attention. That's part of why we came down. Do you think, as far as basically a lot of these other killings, like Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Michael Brown, heinous in every case, but this is a different level. You have someone just in their apartment. It's not like he was pulled over, this and that. What does that say about the threat that black people in America are facing, that honestly, just you could be killed just minding your own business?
Yeah. Well, it gives me a great deal of concern, because see the situation that we have now in America, when I'm stopped, by a white police officer, he's concerned, he's afraid for his life, I'm afraid for mine. I don't want to set him off or her off in any kind of way. And so it's a big problem. Again, too many times, and now we've created this concept in America that, well, if the officer says, well, I feared for my life, well, to me, that's an easy defense, because you know that all you have to do is say, well, I feared for my life, and you can get off. And so we've got to address that particular defense as well. I think it's being abused in too many cases where people are being shot and killed, and all the officer has to do is say, I feared for my life. And that's happened with black individuals and white as well, where they're using that as a loophole, and I think it's wrong.
Within the black community, there seems at times to be tension between the older guard and the younger guard. We just saw it last night where, younger people, maybe 20s, 30s, economic boycott. In some cases, like we need to protect ourselves and arm ourselves, where older people, more or less like the NAACP, this and that, kind of and it sometimes want to try to work with the police and community relations and all this. I'm sure you see people of all ages here.
Yep.
What are your thoughts? Because it seems that in some ways protests could make a big difference, but in other ways, it seems like the history of America is real change happens when they fear their wallets.
Right. Well, it's quite unfortunate that if you what kind of what I've experienced in my lifetime is, and I'll say in the beginning, I believe in protests, but doing it peacefully. Now, unfortunately, it seems as though you don't get the proper attention until, you create minor riots. Okay, I'm reminded of the case out in Los Angeles, a number of years ago when Bush one was president, and and he said, well, I didn't even realize we had a race issue here in America until they, this was the Rodney King case, and they tore up Los Angeles, and then he says, hey, well, maybe we do have a race problem. So that's the problem. Is people don't want to stop and listen to you until you begin to riot in the streets, stop traffic, and those types of things. I'm more being older from the point of view is, yes, let's protest, let's do it peacefully, let's sit down and talk about, let's understand all the facts and get all the facts on the table, and then start addressing the problems. And for me, even at the apartment complex, you see, to me, they shouldn't get off the hook here because, that's where the mistake was made. My understanding is it's a mistake that's made quite often. Mm-hmm. Unless they make changes at that complex, it could happen again.
When you say it's a mistake that makes, what mistake are you speaking of as far as the apartment complex?
Well, in terms of the apartment complex, this is what I understand through talking to Botham's parents. At his front door, there's a red welcome mat there because in the past, he had made the mistake going to the wrong apartment. He put that red welcome mat there so that he would never make that mistake again. Mm-hmm. Now, that should have also told Amber Geiger that wasn't her apartment because there was a red doormat there. So they need to make changes at that apartment complex. So
is there something about the layout that makes it confusing?
Apparently, I've never been in, but apparently so. That it's very similar on every floor, but to me, they're very simple things, changes that could be made so that doesn't happen again.
And let me ask you, whatever you could reveal, because obviously conversations with his family are private, but to me, I would think on one end, the police are saying, well, we can't release this information because it might prejudice jury, or it might mean that they'll have to move the case out of Dallas. And they give you reasons why we can't release the 911 call. We can't release her police records, information about the body camera, and what have you. But I would think, as a parent who just lost your child, one of the most terrible parts of it is not knowing what happened. Is the family dealing with that as far as you just, my understanding, the mother and him spoke every day, and they were supposed to talk that night. It must be kind of torture not knowing what happened.
Yeah, I'm sure that it is. Yeah, Botham and his mother were very close. Botham and his sister were close, and they talked all the time. And I think it puts a cloud over things when the police, the Texas Rangers, and those who know won't release this information. You know, I'm a father. I have two daughters, and for me personally, and Botham was a member of my congregation. For me personally, I would like to know the timeline from A to Z. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
What time did she show up at that apartment? What time did she shoot him? What time did she call 911? What time was CPR administered? What time did they take him to the hospital? I mean, every single detail. The family needs to know so that they can get closure. You know, they'll never have closure until these questions are answered.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, it seems like this is a very unusual killing. I mean, all these killings are unusual, but this one in particular. But it seems like most of these things are happening in a over. There's clouds hanging down,
Mm-hmm.
which is economic oppression,
Mm-hmm.
gentrification,
Mm-hmm.
joblessness equals hopelessness. From Chicago to Detroit to Dallas, can you kind of talk about what you see in the community here? Because what I'm seeing is, like a lot of places we go, you got a beautiful 20-block radius downtown,
Yeah.
and then you could drive 10 minutes and it looks like a different city.
Well, you know, somebody said that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But you know, something else that I find is the lack of power also corrupts. So people in the community feel like they don't have any say so. Black males feel that, you know, a police officer can enter my home, shoot me dead, and nothing will be done about it. So we have to be very careful in this country when we create an environment that has been created, when we create a system that penalizes an individual just because of his race and his gender, being a black male, that there's a high probability that he's going to either end up dead or in prison because of the environment that has been created in this country. So, yes, that's a big problem with all the economic situation that we have, and then the fact that the odds are against you, you know, when you are a black male.